The story began when Alexander Rothwell, a man of commanding presence but dressed in plain clothes that morning, checked into one of the most renowned luxury hotels in the city, a property that had once been the crown jewel of his international hospitality empire. Alexander was no ordinary guest. He was the founder and CEO of the very company that owned this chain of hotels. Yet hardly anyone on the staff that day recognized him because he had decided to come undercover without the entourage, without the tailored suits, without the aura of wealth that usually preceded his every step. His purpose was simple but critical. He wanted to see for himself how the hotel was operating when management thought no eyes of consequence were watching. He had received reports from investors and even some discreet customer complaints suggesting the service had declined, the staff had grown arrogant, and the property no longer reflected the values of excellence upon which his empire had been built. He walked through the gleaming lobby, noting how the chandelier sparkled brilliantly overhead, but also how the front desk clerk barely lifted his head to greet him. Instead of offering a warm welcome, the clerk muttered something under his breath, shoved a form across the desk, and barked, "Fill this out." Alexander signed in, quietly observing the lack of customer service, the dismissive attitude, and the sheer absence of hospitality in a place that charged guests thousands of dollars per night. He wasn't there to scold yet. He wanted to watch. He noticed bellhops gossiping near the elevator rather than offering to help with his bag, waitstaff rolling their eyes at a couple who asked for directions to the spa, and a manager striding across the lobby with a scowl, as though guests were inconveniences rather than the lifeblood of the business. When Alexander finally entered his assigned suite, he found crumbs on the carpet, a wine glass smudged on the minibar, and a faint odor that should never have existed in a so-called five-star establishment. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Alexander felt his resolve harden. This was no longer just a casual inspection, this was going to be a reckoning. He knew he could not reveal his identity yet, for the test would be meaningless if they treated him differently after learning who he was. Instead, he planned to remain the unnoticed guest, quietly compiling evidence. Yet, destiny had other plans, because within a matter of hours the staff's negligence would escalate from subtle slights into outright disrespect, culminating in an incident that would shock everyone in the building, and it would begin with him being thrown out of his own hotel like an unwanted intruder. The turning point came later that afternoon when Alexander decided to dine at the hotel's exclusive restaurant, a place famed for its award-winning chefs and high-class clientele. He wore his simple blazer, nothing extravagant, and sat alone at a corner table, waiting patiently for a server. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The waiters passed by him several times, attending quickly to well-dressed guests in suits and designer dresses while deliberately ignoring the man who looked like he didn't belong. Finally, one server approached, but not with a menu or a smile, rather with suspicion dripping from her tone as she asked if he was sure he could afford to eat there. Alexander swallowed his frustration and asked politely for a menu, but the server smirked and said the kitchen was busy serving real guests. The insult was blatant, and the other staff chuckled as though his presence was laughable. He decided to test them further by requesting the manager, but instead of professionalism, the restaurant manager stormed over, sneered at his plainclothes, and accused him of loitering in the establishment. Alexander calmly explained he was a paying guest in their suite upstairs, but the manager refused to listen. Within moments, 2 security guards appeared, and before he could protest, they escorted him out of the restaurant through the lobby and eventually outside onto the pavement in front of shocked onlookers. The humiliation was total. Here was the founder, the owner, the man whose vision had built this empire, being treated like trash at the very doorstep of his creation. For a brief second, Alexander felt anger surge through his veins, the kind of fury that only betrayal could bring. But instead of shouting his identity then and there, he decided to let the staff dig themselves deeper into their pit of arrogance. He stood outside, watching as the doorman whispered and chuckled, pointing at him as though he were some vagrant trying to sneak into a world that wasn't his. Alexander pulled out his phone, made a discreet call to his corporate office, and instructed his senior executives to be at the hotel in 20 minutes. Bring the legal team, he said in a low, steady voice, and prepare for staff meeting. The storm was gathering, and though the staff thought they had rid themselves of an inconvenience, they had unknowingly set the stage for their downfall, because Alexander was about to return not as a disrespected guest, but as their ultimate boss, wielding authority that would change the course of their careers forever. When Alexander re-entered the hotel 20 minutes later, he was no longer alone. Flanking him were his chief operating officer, his head of human resources, two senior attorneys, and three executives who managed other luxury properties under the brand. Their arrival turned heads immediately, for these were faces well known in the hospitality industry, people who carried themselves with undeniable authority. The hotel staff froze, suddenly unsure why a group of corporate powerhouses had descended upon them without warning. Then the general manager appeared, adjusting his tie nervously, attempting to put on a polite smile while greeting Alexander with, "Good evening, sir. Welcome to our property." But it was too late for masks. Alexander's plain blazer and earlier humiliation were still fresh in his mind, and with a cold glare he replied, "I'm already here, and I've been here all day." The general manager blinked in confusion, clearly not recognizing him yet, until one of the executives whispered his name. Suddenly, a wave of panic washed across the lobby. Whispers spread like wildfire. "It's him. It's Mr. Rothwell, the owner." Faces drained of color. The same staff who had mocked him only moments earlier now tried to look busy, straightening their uniforms, avoiding eye contact. The front desk clerk who had shoved paperwork at him earlier suddenly bowed and asked if he needed assistance. The bellhops who ignored him earlier grabbed bags from thin air as if ready to serve. The restaurant manager, realizing his mistake, rushed forward with rehearsed apologies about misunderstandings and overwhelmed staff. But Alexander raised his hand and silenced the entire room. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Enough. I have seen enough. I walked into this hotel not as your boss, not as the man who signs your paychecks, but as a guest, the same way every customer walks through those doors. And you failed. Not just one of you, but all of you." Gasps echoed through the lobby as his words thundered, and the weight of the moment pressed down on every staff member present. He detailed everything he had observed: the careless front desk clerk, the bellhops ignoring guests, the rude servers, the unsanitary suite, and finally the unforgivable act of being thrown out of his own hotel. Each example landed like a hammer blow, and the staff trembled as realization dawned. This was no ordinary corporate checkup. This was Judgment Day. In that tense silence, Alexander delivered the final verdict that would alter lives. "You have forgotten what hospitality means," he declared, his voice resonating across the marble walls. "You've treated guests like burdens, mocked those who didn't fit your shallow picture of wealth, and dishonored the brand I built from nothing. Today, that ends." He turned to his COO and HR head. "Effective immediately, the entire on-duty staff is terminated. Every one of them. Security, escort them out and lock their access cards. They will not step foot in this building again." Shockwaves rippled through the lobby. Some staff begged for second chances, others cried, while a few stormed out angrily. But the decision was final. Guests, who had been quietly observing from the lounge and staircase, burst into murmurs of approval, some even clapping softly as justice was served before their eyes. Alexander then announced a bold plan. "We will be flying in staff from other properties to temporarily run this hotel while we rebuild a team worthy of its name. Recruitment will begin immediately, and every hire will understand this. Hospitality is not about chandeliers and marble floors. It is about respect, humility, and service." The executives nodded firmly, already making calls and sending instructions. As the last of the disgraced employees were escorted out, Alexander stood in the lobby with his hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the stunned, yet inspired guests. He had been humiliated, yes, but that humiliation had exposed the rot festering in his organization. And like any good leader, he would not let it spread further. That night, he stayed in a freshly cleaned suite, personally serviced by staff flown in from another city, And as he looked out over the glittering skyline, he knew the lesson would echo across his empire. No one, not even the highest manager, was safe from accountability when the values of the brand were betrayed. The luxury hotel would rise again, stronger, but the story of the undercover boss who was kicked out and then returned to fire the entire staff on the spot would live on as a legend in the world of hospitality, a stark reminder that respect cannot be faked and arrogance has no place in service.